Welcome to Shadow Lore. Story 1. The Haunting of Blackwood Cabin. As I drove along the winding roads of Blackwood Forest, the thick trees looming on either side felt like they were closing in, the sunlight dimming with each passing moment. I was on my way to a cabin that had belonged to my late grandfather, a place that held cherished memories of summer vacations and family gatherings. But this time, I was going alone, seeking solitude and a chance to reflect. When I arrived, the cabin stood as I remembered, rustic with peeling paint, and a creaky porch that seemed to sigh under my weight. I stepped inside, the musty scent of old wood and memories flooding my senses. I set down my bags and took a moment to breathe in the stillness. Little did I know, this stillness was deceptive. That evening, as darkness descended, I lit a fire in the stone fireplace, the flames flickering and casting dancing shadows on the walls. I settled into an old armchair with a book, but my mind was restless. Strange noises creaked from the floorboards, echoes of the past mingling with my thoughts. A sudden chill brushed against my neck, making me shiver despite the warmth of the fire. I brushed it off as nothing, just my imagination running wild. Later that night, I was jolted awake by a soft whisper, the words indistinguishable but laced with urgency. I sat up, heart pounding, scanning the dimly lit room. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting an eerie glow around me. I reached for my phone, the screen illuminating my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet the air felt charged with a presence I couldn't explain. Deciding it was best to investigate, I tiptoed out of my room, clutching the phone like a lifeline. As I wandered through the cabin, the whispers grew louder, leading me to the old attic door. I hesitated, the wooden door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. A staircase spiraled upward into darkness, the faint scent of dust and something else, something metallic, wafting down. With every step, the air thickened, and I felt an inexplicable weight pressing down on me. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, forgotten trinkets, and dust-covered memories. In the corner, an antique mirror caught my eye. Its surface was clouded, but as I approached, I noticed a faint reflection, someone standing behind me. I spun around, but the attic was empty, just me and the silence. My heart raced as I turned back to the mirror. There it was again, a shadowy figure, a woman with hollow eyes, staring back at me. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, crashing into an old chest that flung open, revealing my grandfather's belongings. Dusty letters, photographs, and an old diary. Desperate to escape the haunting vision, I grabbed the diary and fled down the stairs. I collapsed onto the living room floor, gasping for breath. The diary fell open in my lap, pages yellowed with age. Flipping through, I stumbled upon a passage that made my blood run cold. It spoke of a woman named Eleanor, my grandfather's long-lost love, who had vanished one fateful night in the woods surrounding the cabin. The last entry hinted at a secret. The forest held dark forces, and Eleanor was drawn to them. Feeling a mix of dread and curiosity, I continued reading. The more I discovered about Eleanor, the more I felt a connection to her plight. She had sought solace in the forest, only to find herself ensnared by its malevolent spirit. The whispers I had heard earlier seemed to echo her name. Unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, I decided to confront whatever presence lingered in the cabin. I lit candles around the living room, hoping to create a barrier of light. I recited a protection chant I had read online, the words tumbling from my lips like a prayer. As I spoke, the temperature in the room dropped, and a gust of wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing the candles. The whispers morphed into anguished cries, and the walls seemed to tremble. I stood my ground, refusing to let fear consume me. "Eleanor, if you're here, I want to help you," I shouted, my voice echoing in the silence. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The cries transformed into a mournful melody, a song that resonated deep within my soul. It was beautiful yet heartbreaking. I felt drawn to the attic again, compelled by an unknown force. This time, I climbed the stairs with purpose, heart racing. I approached the mirror, which shimmered with an otherworldly glow. I looked into it, and for a fleeting moment, I saw Eleanor's face clearly. A mix of sadness and longing. "Help me find peace," her voice echoed in my mind. Driven by a surge of empathy, I knew I had to uncover the truth of her disappearance. I scoured through the diary, piecing together the last moments of her life. It revealed a hidden glade in the forest, a place where she had often gone to escape. Legend had it that the forest was alive, and those who ventured too deep would never return. As dawn broke, I made my way into the woods, armed with a diary and a determination to find the glade. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light on the path ahead. Each step felt heavy, as if the forest itself was trying to deter me. But I pressed on, guided by a sense of purpose. Hours later, I stumbled upon a clearing. The air was thick with magic, an ethereal glow illuminating the area. At its center lay a stone altar, worn by time and nature. I felt a pull, as if the earth beneath me was beckoning. I placed the diary on the altar, reciting Eleanor's name as if it were a spell. The forest responded. A whirlwind of leaves and light engulfed me, and in that moment, I felt a presence surround me, a warmth, a sense of peace. The whispers transformed into a soft voice, thanking me for bringing her story to light. As the whirlwind subsided, I turned to leave, knowing I had freed Eleanor's spirit. The shadows that once loomed over Blackwood Cabin seemed to dissipate, replaced by a serene calm. I returned to the cabin, feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since arriving, the whispers now mere echoes of the past. The following morning, I packed my things, ready to leave. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. It stood there, a sentinel of secrets, now filled with the light of a story told. Story 2. Whispers in the Woods. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun and adventure, a chance to escape the chaos of city life. My friends and I had rented a remote cabin deep within the heart of Cedarwood Forest. The promise of hiking trails, fresh air, and campfire stories drew us in. But little did we know. We were stepping into something much darker than we anticipated. The drive was long, winding through thick trees that seemed to whisper secrets as we passed. As we pulled up to the cabin, a sense of unease washed over me. The structure was weathered and worn, with chipped paint and sagging shutters, yet it held a certain charm. It was isolated, surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the sunlight, casting an eerie shadow over the place. After unloading our gear, we gathered around the fire pit, excitedly planning our hikes for the next day. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness enveloped us. We lit a fire, its flickering flames dancing against the night sky. Laughter filled the air as we shared ghost stories, unaware of the true horror that awaited us. As the night deepened, an unsettling chill swept through the forest. The trees rustled, and I swore I heard faint whispers carried by the wind. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My friends shrugged it off, attributing it to the sounds of the forest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. After a few rounds of s'mores and stories, we decided to call it a night. I retreated to my room, a small space with a single window facing the woods. As I lay in bed, the darkness pressed in around me. I closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me, replaced by an oppressive awareness of the shadows that danced just beyond my window. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a strange noise, scratching at the window. Heart pounding, I turned my head slowly, peering into the darkness. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting ghostly shapes on the wall. The scratching continued, rhythmic and persistent. I mustered the courage to approach the window, heart racing, and pulled back the curtain. Nothing was there. Shaking off the fear, I returned to bed, convinced it was just my imagination. But sleep was a long time coming, the whispers of the woods echoing in my mind. The next morning, I shared my experience with my friends over breakfast. You probably just heard some branches scraping against the window. Jake, the skeptic of the group, laughed. There's nothing to be scared of. But I noticed the way his eyes flickered nervously when he glanced at the woods. Determined to shake off the unsettling feeling, we set out for a hike. The sun was shining, and the forest seemed alive with sounds, chirping birds, rustling leaves, and the crunch of twigs underfoot. We followed a narrow trail, laughing and joking, but as we ventured deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The sunlight dimmed, the trees closing in around us. We reached a clearing where a massive oak tree stood alone, its gnarled branches stretching skyward. As we rested, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking behind the trees. "Hey, check this out," Sarah called, drawing our attention to an old, weathered sign nailed to the tree. The letters were faded, but it read, "Beware of the whispers." A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a surge of dread. "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's probably just a local legend," Jake scoffed, but his bravado was tinged with uncertainty. After a quick lunch, we decided to head back. As we retraced our steps, the whispers grew louder, as if the forest was alive with voices. I could no longer dismiss them as the wind. They were distinct, fragmented phrases that echoed around us. "Get out. Leave now. You shouldn't be here." Panic began to bubble beneath my skin, and I quickened my pace. "Did you hear that?" I gasped, looking at my friends. Their faces mirrored my fear, eyes wide with confusion. They had heard it too. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground. We gathered inside, unease settling in our stomachs like a heavy stone. That evening, we attempted to shake off our fears by playing games, but the tension was palpable. As night fell, the whispers returned, weaving through the trees outside. I could hear them clearer now, a cacophony of disembodied voices begging us to leave. We huddled around the fireplace, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imagination. "Let's go outside, face our fears," Jake suggested, trying to lighten the mood. Reluctantly, we agreed. Stepping into the cool night air, we stood in a circle, the flickering light of the fire behind us. The forest felt alive, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine as I looked around. The trees seemed to shift, the shadows lengthening, creeping closer. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, echoing through the woods. It was Sarah. We turned to find her pale and trembling, pointing towards the tree line. "Did you see that?" she gasped, her voice shaky. "Something moved!" Before we could respond, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, thin, with long, bony fingers reaching towards us. Panic gripped us as we scrambled back towards the cabin, fear propelling us faster than we thought possible. We slammed the door shut, locking it tight, breathless and terrified. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, my heart racing. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Jake exclaimed, his face ashen. We huddled together, the whispers growing more intense, almost mocking us now. The temperature in the cabin dropped, our breaths visible in the air. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, the whispers morphed into a single voice, low and sinister. "You shouldn't have come here." Desperate for answers, we rifled through the drawers, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. In the back of a shelf, we found an old newspaper clipping, It detailed a string of mysterious disappearances in Cedarwood Forest, with tales of people who had ventured into the woods and never returned. The article mentioned a local legend, a malevolent spirit that roamed the forest, preying on those who dared to disturb its peace. My blood ran cold as I read the chilling details, the names of the missing echoing in my mind. "We need to leave now," I urged, my voice trembling. As we gathered our things, a loud bang echoed through the cabin, shaking the walls. The front door burst open, the wind howling violently. In the doorway stood the shadowy figure from before, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. I felt a primal fear surge through me, paralyzing me in place. "Run!" Jake shouted, snapping me out of my stupor. We bolted towards the back door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned to screams, drowning out our frantic cries for help. With a desperate shove, I finally forced the door open, and we spilled out into the night. We sprinted into the forest, branches whipping against our skin, the darkness closing in around us. The whispers chased us, echoing through the trees as we stumbled deeper into the woods. In our panic, we lost our sense of direction. The trees seemed to twist and turn, the path shifting beneath our feet. I could hear Sarah sobbing behind me, her breath ragged. "Where are we going?" she cried. "Just keep running," I yelled, pushing myself forward. We had to find a way out. Finally, we broke into a small clearing, moonlight spilling down. We paused, gasping for breath, scanning the area for any sign of safety. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone circle, weathered by time. "Maybe we can hide here," Sarah suggested, trembling. We crouched down, our hearts pounding as the whispers grew closer, the figure lurking just beyond the trees. The air felt thick, electric, and I sensed the presence drawing nearer. Suddenly, a thought struck me. What if this stone circle held some sort of protection? "I think we need to stand in the circle," I urged, grabbing my friend's hands and pulling them into the center. As we huddled together, the whispers turned into a low growl, the trees swaying ominously. We closed our eyes, focusing on the warmth of our connection. "Please let us go," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. The air grew still, and for a moment, the whispers faded. Then, a powerful force surged through the clearing, pushing against us. It felt like we were being lifted, suspended in a void. I could feel the energy of the forest swirling around us, the whispers transforming into a harmonious chant, urging us to release our fear. With a final rush, the energy exploded outward, shattering the darkness that surrounded us. The oppressive weight lifted, and when we opened our eyes, the forest was quiet again. The figure was gone, the whispers reduced to a soft rustle in the trees. We stood in the stone circle, breathless and shaken, but alive. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know," I replied, still reeling from the experience. "But I think we're safe now." With cautious optimism, we stepped out of the stone circle, feeling an odd sense of relief wash over us. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the path back to the cabin. We moved together, a united front, the tension in our shoulders slowly easing with each step. As we approached the cabin, a sense of familiarity washed over us, but the fear of what had transpired still lingered. "We need to pack our things and leave," Jake said firmly. "No more messing around. We're getting out of here." Once inside, we quickly gathered our belongings, the oppressive silence amplifying our fear. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on us, the echoes of the whispers still haunting the back of my mind. Every creak of the cabin felt like a warning, but we pressed on, determined to escape the nightmare. Finally, we piled into the car, adrenaline coursing through our veins. As we drove away from Cedarwood Forest, the shadows began to retreat in the rearview mirror, but the experience left a lasting mark. I glanced at my friends, their faces pale and drawn. "I can't believe we made it out," I murmured, still trying to process what had happened. "We shouldn't have ignored the signs," Jake said, his voice heavy with regret. "We should have listened to the whispers." As we navigated the winding roads, I caught a glimpse of the forest one last time. The towering trees stood tall, and I felt an eerie sense of connection to the place, despite the terror it held. Perhaps the forest was more alive than we understood, a guardian of its own secrets, protecting its realm from intruders. The memories of that weekend haunted us long after we returned home. We shared our story with friends, but no one believed the depth of our experience. They laughed it off as a weekend of camping gone wrong, but we knew better. The whispers would forever linger in our minds, a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. Years passed, and life moved on, but the haunting whispers of Cedarwood Forest never faded from my memory. I often found myself staring into the woods, the shadows dancing in the corners of my mind, reminding me that there are things in this world we cannot explain. One night, unable to shake the feeling, I gathered my courage and returned to the forest alone. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the echoes of the past brushing against my skin. I reached the clearing, heart racing, and stood in the stone circle once more, the cool earth beneath my feet grounding me. "I'm here," I called out into the stillness, seeking answers to the lingering questions that plagued my mind. "I'm ready to listen." As if in response, the whispers began again, soft at first but growing louder, filling the air around me. I closed my eyes and listened, allowing the forest to envelop me, hoping for clarity amidst the chaos. The voices danced through my thoughts, weaving a tapestry of stories, warnings, tales of those who had come before me, and lessons learned in the shadows. "Leave this place," they cautioned, their voices echoing like a chilling wind through the trees. "It is not safe. You are not welcome." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I absorbed their warning, a mix of fear and understanding flooding my heart. I had returned seeking answers, but all I found was the undeniable truth that the forest held its own power, a force that demanded respect. With renewed resolve, I opened my eyes, taking one last look at the ancient trees. "I understand," I whispered, gratitude and sorrow intertwining in my heart. "I'll never forget." As I turned to leave, the whispers faded, and the forest grew silent, the weight of its secrets lifting. I walked away, leaving the past behind but carrying the lessons of Cedarwood Forest with me. A reminder that some places hold mysteries meant to remain untouched, and some whispers are best left unheard. Story 3. The Mirror's Reflection. My name is Rachel, and I've always had a fascination with the unusual. Growing up, I would scour antique shops and flea markets, searching for hidden treasures. It was during one of these excursions that I stumbled upon an old mirror, its frame intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The moment I saw it, I felt a pull, an unexplainable urge to take it home. Despite its age and slight tarnish, the mirror was stunning. I didn't think twice about the price. The seller seemed eager to part with it, as if it had been gathering dust for years. I was excited as I loaded it into my car, unaware that my life was about to take a terrifying turn. When I got home, I positioned the mirror in my bedroom, facing the bed. Its surface gleamed with an ethereal light, and for the first few days, everything seemed normal. I admired my reflection, feeling a sense of connection to the mirror, as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. But then strange things began to happen. At first, it was just odd shadows darting behind me when I passed the mirror. I brushed it off as a trick of the light. However, the incidents escalated. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed my reflection lingered a moment longer than I did. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. The next night, as I lay in bed, I awoke to the sound of whispering. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, resonating from the direction of the mirror. My heart raced as I turned to look. The mirror reflected my room perfectly, yet something felt off. I could see a faint silhouette behind me, a shadowy figure that seemed to shift and move, independent of my actions. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whispering stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I was alone. The following days were filled with strange occurrences. Items would disappear only to reappear in odd places. I would hear soft giggles echoing in the night, and sometimes I would find my reflection smiling back at me when I wasn't. The mirror seemed to be toying with me, playing a sinister game I couldn't understand. Desperate for answers, I did some research on the symbols carved into the frame. What I found chilled me to the bone. The mirror was said to be a portal, a gateway to a dark realm where lost souls lingered, trapped between worlds. The previous owner, a woman named Eliza, had vanished under mysterious circumstances, rumored to have become ensnared within the mirror's grasp. Fearful of what might happen, I considered getting rid of it, but the thought of leaving the mirror behind was unbearable. It had become a part of me, an enigma I felt compelled to unravel. One night, I decided to confront the mirror. "Eliza, if you're there, show yourself," I demanded, standing before the reflective surface. The air thickened, and a low hum filled the room, vibrating through my bones. My reflection flickered, and for a moment I saw her, a pale woman with hollow eyes staring back at me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo that sent shivers down my spine. "Help you? How?" I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "I am trapped. The mirror holds me captive. You must break it to set me free," she pleaded, her image growing fainter. "Break it?" I gasped, horrified by the thought. "What will happen to you?" "I don't know," she admitted, fear evident in her voice. "But I cannot remain here any longer." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. I realized I had a choice to make. Risk shattering the mirror and potentially freeing her spirit, or continue living in fear as the mirror consumed me. As the night wore on, I wrestled with my decision. I was losing sleep, plagued by nightmares of Eliza and the whispers that echoed in my mind. Finally, with trembling hands, I reached for a heavy book on my desk, preparing myself for the inevitable. I swung it down onto the mirror, shattering the glass into 1,000 shards. The sound was deafening, and a rush of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. In the chaos, I heard Eliza's voice clearer than before. "Thank you," she exclaimed, and for a fleeting moment I felt her presence, warm and freeing. But then the darkness grew oppressive, the air thickening around me. I stumbled backward, the remnants of the mirror reflecting fragments of the room, casting distorted images across the walls. In a blur, I saw glimpses of my life, happy memories entwined with haunting shadows. It was as if the mirror was showing me the duality of existence, the light and dark, intertwined forever. Suddenly, I felt a pull, a force dragging me toward the broken glass. I resisted, fighting against the invisible grip. "No!" I cried out, panic rising in my throat. The wind howled around me, and the shadows danced menacingly. Just when I thought I would be consumed, the whispers erupted into a cacophony, reverberating in my mind. "Leave this place. You must choose," they cried, their voices merging into one. With a final surge of determination, I broke free from the unseen hold, stumbling away from the shattered remnants of the mirror. The whispers subsided, replaced by a heavy silence. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, the realization of what I had done crashing over me. I had shattered the mirror and freed Eliza. But at what cost? Days turned into weeks, and the lingering effects of that night haunted me. The room felt lighter, but I could still feel Eliza's presence, a lingering echo in the back of my mind. I knew she was gone, but the connection remained. One evening, as I was tidying up the remnants of the broken mirror, I discovered a small shard that hadn't shattered completely. It shimmered in the light, and I felt a sense of familiarity wash over me. "Thank you for freeing me," a voice whispered from the shard. I looked into it, and for the first time, I felt peace. Eliza was gone, but her spirit had found solace. I placed the shard in a small box, a reminder of the connection we had formed, a bond that transcended the darkness. Though the mirror was gone, the memories lingered, a haunting reminder that some reflections hold more than just our images. They hold stories, secrets, and connections that bind us to realms we cannot see. And sometimes, breaking those reflections can lead to liberation, both for ourselves and those lost within the shadows. Story 4. Haunting of Hollow Creek. My name is David, and I never believed in ghosts. I always thought of the paranormal as something fabricated, stories to scare children or sell cheap horror movies. That all changed when I took a trip to Hollow Creek, a small, nearly forgotten town tucked away in the dense Appalachian Mountains. My best friend Matt had convinced me to join him on a weekend getaway, promising peaceful nature trails and a chance to unwind. Hollow Creek wasn't on any maps we had. It was the kind of place that had been swallowed by time, with old, decaying buildings and a single gas station that seemed frozen in the 1950s. The town had an eerie quietness to it, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. From the moment we arrived, something felt off. The locals stared at us as we walked into the small convenience store. Their gazes were cold, almost like they knew something we didn't. I brushed it off as small-town suspicion of outsiders, but Matt, ever the adventurer, didn't seem to notice. We had rented a cabin just outside of town, close to a creek that gave the place its name. The cabin was old but quaint, with a rustic charm that almost made me forget the strange vibe in town. Almost. The first night, as we sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The forest surrounding us was dense, the towering trees creating a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. Shadows danced in the flickering firelight, and every crack of a branch sent my heart racing. Matt laughed it off, teasing me for being jumpy, but even he seemed to grow quieter as the night went on. As we were preparing to head inside, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from the direction of the creek. It sounded like whispering, but not in any language I could understand. I froze, straining to hear more clearly. "You hear that?" I asked Matt, my voice barely above a whisper. He frowned, turning his head toward the sound. "Yeah." "What is that?" The whispers grew louder, though the source remained unseen. A cold chill settled over the clearing, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. We both stood there, listening, as the whispers seemed to circle us, coming from every direction yet nowhere at all. "Let's go inside," Matt said, his voice tense. We rushed into the cabin, bolting the door behind us. The whispers faded as soon as we were indoors, but the unease remained. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. The next morning, we decided to explore the creek. Despite the previous night's unsettling experience, Matt was eager to check out the area. The creek was beautiful, winding through the forest with crystal-clear water that sparkled in the sunlight. For a moment, I forgot about the whispers and let myself enjoy the serenity of the place. As we followed the creek upstream, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated house. It was barely visible through the overgrown foliage, but there was something about it that drew us in. The house looked like it had been abandoned for decades, with boarded-up windows and a sagging roof. Matt, ever the curious one, insisted we check it out. "Come on, it's probably just an old hunting cabin," he said, already making his way toward the front door. I hesitated, a deep sense of dread settling in my stomach. "I don't know, man. This place gives me the creeps." "Don't be a wuss, it's just a house," Matt replied with a grin, pushing open the door, which creaked ominously on its hinges. The inside of the house was even worse than the outside. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like forgotten decorations. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something rotten. As we moved through the house, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, intricate patterns that seemed out of place in such an old building. They reminded me of something I'd seen in a book about ancient rituals, but I couldn't remember the details. "What do you think these are?" Matt asked, tracing one of the symbols with his finger. "I don't know, but I don't like it," I replied, my voice echoing in the empty house. We continued exploring, but the deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt like the house was watching us, its walls closing in, suffocating. Then we heard it again, the whispering. Louder this time, more distinct. Matt and I exchanged a glance, fear flickering in his eyes for the first time. "We should get out of here," he said, his voice shaky. I didn't argue. We turned to leave, but as we reached the front door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the entire house. Panic set in, and we both rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding us like a chorus of disembodied voices. "David, what the hell is going on?" Matt shouted, pulling at the door with all his strength. "I don't know, just keep trying," I yelled back, frantically looking for another way out. As we struggled with the door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing in the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. It was a woman, her face obscured by shadows, but her presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Matt, look," I whispered, pointing toward the figure. He turned, his face going pale as he saw her. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, but the whispers intensified, filling the room with a deafening roar. Suddenly, the door flew open, and we stumbled outside, gasping for breath. The whispers stopped as soon as we crossed the threshold, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. We didn't stop running until we reached the cabin. Once inside, we bolted the door and collapsed onto the floor, our hearts racing. "What the hell was that?" Matt gasped, his face pale and sweat-soaked. "I don't know," I replied, my hands shaking. "But we need to leave, now." Without wasting another minute, we packed our things and left Hollow Creek. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman standing in the road behind us. But there was nothing, just the empty, silent town fading into the distance. To this day, I still don't know what we encountered in that house, but I'll never forget the whispers or the figure in the hallway. Matt and I haven't spoken about it since, and I've avoided any mention of Hollow Creek. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers. Story 5. Uninvited Guest. It started as a typical Friday night, and I was looking forward to a relaxing weekend. My name is James, and I've lived alone for the past 5 years in a small, quiet town where nothing ever happens. The kind of town where people still leave their doors unlocked, and you know your neighbors by name. For me, it was the perfect place to escape the chaos of city life. I had just come home from a long day at work, eager to unwind with a glass of wine and a good movie. The sun had already set, casting a faint orange glow over the horizon as the last traces of daylight disappeared. I pulled into my driveway, noticing the peaceful stillness in the air. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until I stepped inside. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt it, a heavy, oppressive presence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the lingering stress from a long work week playing tricks on my mind. But something was different about the atmosphere in the house. It felt off. I shrugged it off, hoping that a hot shower and some time to unwind would ease the strange feeling. After all, it wasn't the first time I'd come home feeling like the house was too quiet, too still. I figured it was just the side effect of living alone for so long. After the shower, I settled on the couch with my glass of wine, flipping through channels aimlessly. I wasn't in the mood for anything too intense, so I settled on a light-hearted comedy. As I got comfortable, the uneasy feeling began to fade. I was finally starting to relax when I heard it. A faint creak coming from upstairs. At first, I didn't react. My house was old, and old houses made noises. That's what I told myself, at least. But then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate creak, like someone was walking across the floor above me. I paused the TV and sat in silence, listening. The sound continued, growing louder, more distinct. My heart rate quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. It was probably just the house settling, I reasoned. Houses make noises all the time, right? But the creaking didn't stop. It was rhythmic, purposeful, like footsteps. Slowly, I stood up and made my way to the foot of the stairs. The lights were off upstairs, and as I peered into the darkness, that oppressive feeling returned, heavier this time. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No answer. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and began ascending the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, and with every creak, my anxiety grew. When I reached the top of the stairs, I shone the light down the hallway. Everything seemed normal. The doors to the bedrooms and bathroom were all closed, just as I had left them that morning. Still, the sense that something was wrong gnawed at me. I checked each room, one by one. First the guest bedroom, then the bathroom, and finally my own bedroom. Everything was as it should be. There was no sign of anyone or anything out of place. Relieved but still unnerved, I headed back downstairs. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I froze. My front door was wide open. I was sure I had closed it when I came home. Positive, even. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening. Had I forgotten to lock it? Had the wind blown it open? But there was no wind, and the door was heavy. There was no way it had opened on its own. Panic started to set in. I grabbed a kitchen knife and cautiously approached the door, peering outside into the dark. The street was empty, and everything was eerily quiet. I quickly shut the door, locking it this time, and backed away, my mind running wild with possibilities. Was someone in the house with me? Had someone broken in while I was upstairs? I checked every window, every door, making sure everything was locked. But the house was silent again, and after a few minutes I began to doubt myself. Maybe I had left the door unlocked after all. Maybe there was no intruder, and I was just being paranoid. But then, just as I started to relax, I heard it again, the creaking coming from upstairs. This time, it was unmistakable. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps moving across the floor above me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that whatever, or whoever it was, they hadn't left. With the knife still in hand, I made my way back up the stairs, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The creaking continued, growing louder as I approached the landing. It was coming from my bedroom. I stopped outside the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The creaking stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. I took a deep breath and threw open the door, shining the light into the room. Nothing. The room was empty, just as I had left it. But then I saw it, something that made my blood run cold. On the floor, near the foot of my bed, were footprints. Wet, muddy footprints leading from the door to the window. The window was slightly ajar, a cold breeze blowing in. My heart raced as I backed out of the room, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Someone had been in my house, walking around while I was downstairs, and they had left through the window. But how? I had checked the windows earlier. They had all been closed. I raced downstairs, my mind in a frenzy. I dialed 911, barely able to form coherent sentences as I explained to the operator what had happened. Within minutes, the police arrived, but by then, whoever had been in the house was long gone. The officers searched the house and the surrounding area, but they found no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there. It was as if the intruder had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the muddy footprints. For the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I installed security cameras, changed all the locks, and even considered moving, but nothing ever happened again. The cameras never picked up anything unusual, and the strange noises stopped. But every now and then, late at night, I think about those muddy footprints and the open window, and I can't help but wonder if the uninvited guest is still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. Story 6. The Abandoned Motel. I was never one for spontaneous road trips. I'm the kind of person who needs to have everything planned out. Where I'm going, where I'll stay, what I'll eat. But that weekend was different. I had been under a lot of stress at work, and when my friend Eric suggested we just hit the road and drive without a destination, something inside me said yes. Maybe I needed the unpredictability, the chance to leave my carefully structured life behind, even if it was just for a couple of days. We packed light, threw some snacks in the car, and set out early Saturday morning. Eric was behind the wheel, and I was in the passenger seat, watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to wide-open fields. The freedom was intoxicating, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. After driving for hours, the sun began to set, casting a reddish glow over the empty highway. We hadn't seen another car for miles, and our phones had long lost signal. That was fine with us, though. We weren't in a rush to get anywhere. We'd figure it out when the time came. It wasn't until it got dark that we started to think about where we'd spend the night. We hadn't passed through any towns for a while, and the nearest one, according to the last sign we'd seen, was still about 50 miles away. That's when we saw it. A dimly lit sign on the side of the road. Motel. Thank God, Eric said, pulling into the gravel parking lot. The motel looked like something straight out of a 1970s horror movie. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the neon sign flickered as if it was on its last leg. But it was the only option we had. I hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car, but Eric was already grabbing his bag from the back seat. "Come on, it's not that bad," he said, grinning. I followed him to the front desk where a middle-aged woman sat behind the counter, flipping through an old magazine. She barely glanced up as we walked in. "Do you have a room for the night?" Eric asked. She didn't answer at first, just stared at us like we were interrupting something important. Then, without a word, she handed Eric a key. "Room 7, she said in a monotone voice. "Thanks," he replied, a little taken aback by her coldness. But we were both too tired to care much. We just wanted a place to sleep. The room was what you'd expect from an old, run-down motel. Stale air, musty sheets, and the faint smell of mildew. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the bed looked like it hadn't been changed in weeks. But it had 4 walls and a roof, and that was all we needed. Not exactly the Ritz, Eric joked, tossing his bag onto the bed. But it'll do. I wasn't so sure. There was something about the place that made my skin crawl, the way the shadows seemed to move in the corners of the room, the eerie silence that hung in the air. But I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I shrugged it off. After a quick shower, I settled into bed, hoping that a good night's sleep would ease my unease. But as soon as I turned off the light, the strange feeling intensified. I couldn't shake the sensation that we weren't alone, that someone, or something, was watching us. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the sound of Eric's breathing as he slept. The room was pitch black, but I couldn't stop glancing toward the door, half expecting it to open on its own. My heart pounded in my chest, and I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that the creepiness of the motel was getting to me. But then I heard it, a faint shuffling sound like footsteps coming from outside the room. I sat up, my heart racing. "Eric," I whispered, but he didn't stir. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, listening intently. Then the doorknob slowly began to turn. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone, its weak flashlight casting a small circle of light in the darkness. The door creaked open, just a fraction, but enough for me to see the hallway beyond. It was empty. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the door, slamming it shut and locking it. My hands trembled as I backed away, my mind racing. Had someone been trying to break in? I glanced over at Eric, still sound asleep, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every sound, every creak of the old building sent my nerves on edge. I kept the flashlight on, watching the door, half expecting it to open again. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. Eric woke up refreshed, completely unaware of the terror I had experienced. I didn't tell him what had happened. I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. We checked out and hit the road, leaving the motel behind without a second thought. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the sense that something had been in that room with us. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to look up the motel, to see if anyone else had experienced something similar. What I found made my blood run cold. The motel had been abandoned for over a decade. It had closed down after a series of mysterious disappearances, and the woman who had once owned it had been found dead in one of the rooms. Room 7, to be exact. I still don't know who, or what, gave us that key, or who was trying to enter our room that night. But I do know one thing for sure. I'll never set foot in an abandoned building again. Story 7. Whispers in the Forest. When I was a kid, camping trips with my family were a yearly tradition. My parents would pack up the car, and we'd head out to the mountains for a weekend of hiking, fishing, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. I loved it. The smell of pine trees, the crisp mountain air, the sound of birds chirping at dawn. It felt like a world away from the city. As I got older, those trips became less frequent. Life got busy, and the time to escape into nature seemed to slip away. But a few years ago, my friends and I decided to relive those childhood memories. We planned a weekend camping trip deep in the woods, far from the crowds and the noise. It was supposed to be a relaxing escape, a chance to disconnect from the world. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Ryan, his girlfriend Ashley, and another close friend Jake. We were all experienced campers, so we weren't worried about roughing it for a few days. We wanted isolation, so we chose a spot deep in the forest, miles from the nearest campground. It took us most of the day to hike to the location, a small clearing next to a stream. It was perfect, quiet, serene, and completely cut off from civilization. By the time we set up camp, the sun was beginning to set. We gathered wood for a fire and cooked a simple dinner of hot dogs and beans, laughing and joking as the stars started to appear overhead. It felt good to be out there, away from the stress of work and the constant buzz of our phones. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the gentle rush of the stream nearby. After dinner, we sat around the fire, talking and sharing stories. As the night grew darker, the conversation shifted to ghost stories. It was inevitable. What camping trip is complete without a few scary tales? Jake started with a story about a haunted hotel he had stayed in once, where he swore he had seen a shadowy figure at the foot of his bed. Ashley chimed in with a story about a spooky encounter she had while hiking alone one afternoon. When it was my turn, I shared an old legend my grandfather had told me about a forest spirit that would lure people into the woods with whispers and strange sounds. According to the legend, the spirit would mimic the voices of your loved ones, calling your name and leading you deeper into the forest until you were hopelessly lost. No one who followed the whispers was ever seen again. We all laughed nervously after I finished the story, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. The fire had burned down to embers, and the surrounding forest seemed darker, more oppressive. The wind rustled through the trees, and every creak and snap of a branch made us jump. Eventually, we decided to call it a night. We doused the fire, zipped up our tents, and crawled into our sleeping bags. I fell asleep almost immediately, the exhaustion from the day's hike catching up with me. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still pitch black outside. At first, I thought it was the wind that had woken me, but then I heard it, a faint voice carried on the breeze. "Ryan?" The voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. It sounded like Ashley. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening intently. The voice came again, a little louder this time. "Ryan, come here." I turned toward Ryan's tent, expecting to see him poking his head out, but it was still zipped shut. He wasn't moving. "Ryan," the voice called again, this time from deeper in the woods. Something about the voice sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like Ashley, but off, somehow, like a poor imitation. I could hear the same inflection, the same cadence, but there was something missing, something unnatural. I crawled out of my tent, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was eerily still, no wind, no rustling leaves, just that voice, beckoning from the darkness. I moved toward Ryan's tent and whispered, "Ryan, wake up." He stirred, groggy and confused. "What's up?" "Did you hear that?" I asked, glancing toward the trees. "Hear what?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "Someone's calling your name," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan rubbed his eyes and sat up. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, the voice came again, clearer this time. "Ryan, please." Ryan froze, his eyes widening as he finally heard it. "Ashley?" he called, his voice shaky. But Ashley was fast asleep in her tent, completely unaware of what was happening. I could see her silhouette through the thin fabric, her breathing slow and steady. "Dude, that's not Ashley," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. Ryan got out of his tent, looking toward the woods where the voice had come from. "Who the hell is out there?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. There was no response, just silence. I grabbed his arm. "We need to wake up Jake and Ashley. Something's not right." We quickly woke the others, explaining what we had heard. Jake, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "You guys are just freaked out from the ghost stories," he said, shaking his head. "It's probably just the wind or an animal." But then the voice came again. Louder this time, closer. "Ryan, please help me." Ashley's face went pale. "That sounds like me," she whispered, her voice trembling. We all stood there in stunned silence, staring into the dark forest. The voice was unmistakable now. It was Ashley's voice, but she was standing right next to us. "What the hell is going on?" Jake muttered, looking around nervously. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The legend I had told earlier flashed through my mind. The spirit that mimicked voices to lure people into the woods. It had just been a story, a stupid campfire tale. Or so I had thought. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." Jake started to protest, but then we all heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the direction of the voice. They were slow at first, but then they picked up speed, crashing through the underbrush as something, or someone, ran toward us. Without thinking, we grabbed our gear and bolted. We didn't stop to pack up the tents or even turn on our flashlights. We just ran. The sounds of footsteps and that awful, mocking voice following us through the trees. "Ryan, come back." We ran for what felt like hours, our legs burning, our lungs aching. I could hear Ashley sobbing behind me, Ryan cursing under his breath. The voice never stopped, always just behind us, always calling Ryan's name in that eerie, distorted version of Ashley's voice. Finally, we reached the trailhead, where our car was parked. We piled in, slamming the doors shut, and Ryan floored it, speeding down the dirt road as fast as the car could go. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town, miles away from the forest. Only then did we allow ourselves to breathe, to try to make sense of what had just happened. To this day, none of us can explain it. We never went back to that campsite, and we never talked about it again. But I still hear that voice sometimes, in my dreams, calling my name, luring me into the darkness. Thank you for joining me for tonight's chilling horror stories. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more spine-tingling tales. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share your favorite story or any horror story suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, and may your nights be filled with thrilling adventures.